Hello. Today we visit an old r/AskReddit post to see what family secret was finally spilled. Make sure to comment any funny or weird family traditions you may have. With that, sit back and enjoy. Found out my uncle is actually my brother. My mom had him when she was so young that my grandparents raised him. How old were you when you found out? I was a teenager, 15 I think. It was quite shocking. How old was your brother when he was your uncle? We aren't close, so I don't know for sure, but he's at least 10 years older than me. It didn't seem weird because my mom is the oldest of her 9 siblings. My mother is 17 years younger than the youngest of her 3 siblings and born about a year after that sibling started dating her husband. I am still waiting for this secret to come out. I have asked about it and my mother doesn't think so, but I still think there's an even chance. Could also not be the case. I am the youngest by 17 as well, and while most people thought I was my brother's child, there are pictures of my mom pregnant with me. My sister cheated on her husband throughout her entire marriage to the point that all 3 of her kids have different biological fathers. That's like the reverse of Mamma Mia. Papa someone else. Is one of them from her husband? We think the oldest is, but she rushed into her marriage because we come from a religious family and she thought she might have been pregnant from her last relationship. Her oldest was born almost exactly 9 months after she got married. That's close to mine. Sister cheated on hers for 10 years. The guy she finally left her husband for was a physician assistant involved with the theft and sale of prescription meds, and he ended up being the killer in a murder-suicide 2 years later with his co-conspirator. Each sentence was wilder than the last. When my mother fell ill and I took over her finances, I found thousands of pounds of gambling debt on her credit cards. Then I found adoption papers for a child she'd had before me that she'd never mentioned. Then another family member told me my dad didn't die in a car crash but committed suicide in prison. Damn, that's a lot. I hope you're doing well. Thank you, I'm doing fine. My mother died from her illness and I found the adoption papers the day before the funeral and I got told about my dad on the day of the funeral. Before that I thought we were really normal, very boring people. What happened to the adopted child? Don't know. She kept his birth certificate and there was a letter from solicitors saying she was late in signing the adoption papers, so she obviously had second thoughts about giving him up. My grandmother had a gambling addiction too. She ended up having to sell her nice big house and move to a retirement apartment. She still ended up in massive debt when she passed. I inherited a lot of her things and turns out, a good amount of her decor came from casinos. That's when I really knew how bad she truly was. Honestly, your post made me do a double take because my grandfather died in a car accident. I'm just pretty sure I would have heard about anything different by now. My great-great-grandfather was exiled and banned from Missouri for being a sheep thief. After my grandfather passed, we found out he had fathered a child when he was posted in Italy during World War II. He never knew. His mother intercepted any letters from the Italian girl. He came home, met and married my grandmother and had 4 children. I forget who in the family found out and how. It's crazy to think we have a whole Italian family out there. Edit. Went to sleep and woke up to crazy notifications. Thanks for the awards. To clarify, I'm in the UK, not that it's relevant to the story. My oldest aunt is 77, so this kid would be at least 79 by now, I would think. We've considered doing the DNA testing, but some family members aren't comfortable with how those companies could use the information. It's a really sad story, but if his mother hadn't intercepted the letters, I wouldn't exist. It's a weird place to be in emotionally. Imagine that Italian girl sending letters and believing someday a reply will come. Thinking about it makes me sad. Imagine finding out that your American family exists through a post on Reddit. The kid is probably in her 80s at least now. It'd be interesting if her kid found this thread and told her. My grandmother recently died. She was famous in our town for her amazing cooking, catering, in particular her turkey dinners. Notably, her gravy was absolutely amazing. So delicious. She had a heart attack several years ago and her near-death experience convinced her to share some of her secret recipes with me, all except for her gravy recipe. When she died this spring, I was going through her pantry and found an entire bucket of KFC gravy mix. She was literally using KFC gravy mix as a base to make her incredible gravy. Huge scandal. Faking gravy has got to be the most charming family secret out of all the horrible shit in this thread. I started having problems with my teeth. Spontaneous abscess that resulted in multiple root canals. My dentist did some looking into what the cause might be and found some really odd abnormalities with my incisors, roots and nerves, the teeth that had been afflicting me. So he sent out requests for help to a couple of professors he knew in the field. When my next appointment came up, he was really quiet for a bit before verbally stumbling about. It turns out that what was happening with my teeth was a classic sign of inbreeding, and he was super uncomfortable giving me the news. I brought it up to my mom and she just was like, "Oh well, yeah, didn't you know?" What the duck? Of course I didn't know. Turns out that not very far back in the family tree, several of my relatives decided that it was a good idea to get married to one another. And no one bothered to mention it. Ever. The small town where I live is 85% my relatives, no joke. I hadn't even met all of them, that's how many there are. Edited for clarification, I had made a big point of going far away from my hometown to meet my husband, married 12 years this June, because I was afraid of having children with someone that might be my cousin. Only to find out 5 years after we had been married that I was in fact a product of inbreeding. My husband and I are not related at all. That my grandfather was an atomic soldier. Instead of sending him to fight in the Korean War, they sent him to Nevada, where, after having him turn away from the initial flash, he witnessed the mushroom cloud. After that was over, he was ordered to march to the detonation point, where he was unwittingly exposed to high amounts of radiation. Luckily for my family, my grandpa is now in his 90s, even after a few cancer scares, and the rest of us, my mom, aunt, cousins, sister, and I are cancer-free and fairly healthy, but this is medical information that we really should have known earlier. I remember watching a documentary about sailors who were made to experience an atomic blast. They sat on the deck of a ship while it was blasted out at sea. The old man said he put his hand in front of his closed eyes to shield them, but could still see the bones in his hand like an X-ray through his skin and eyelids. Then they brought those ships back to San Francisco to clean them, which was basically stripping off the paint and burying it in the ground. Still dealing with the contamination to this day. That's crazy to think about. Yeah. Also, the contractor the Navy chose to remediate the contamination then falsified records and data that it was cleaned up, so they built houses and someone found a radium deck marker in their backyard. Those men are in jail now. After my mom died, I found out the real story behind my parents' marriage. She came to my father's country to visit some of her relatives. Met my father, and after just 1 week she asked him to marry her so she could stay in the country. My father accepted because he had no one else and his parents were pressing him to get married already. But the highlight of the story is that over some time, the two of them fell in love with each other. Their love only grew over the time and they were really happy together. My mother spent her last days very ill, and she would accept only my father by her bedside. He swears to this day that she was an angel sent from God to take care of him. I am shocked that they got married just like that, out of the blue, and ended up loving each other so deeply. I can only hope to have as good and loving marriage as they had. My grandma didn't drive. I thought she couldn't, but it was just never discussed. One day when I was maybe 7 or 8, I'd been trying to get anyone to drive me to the store for candy. We were visiting my aunt and uncle, grandma lived with them. They had Bit-O honey at the local store, which I could no longer get at home. But no one would take me to the store. Finally I said I'd just ask grandma, and my cousin chimes in with, "Grandma can't drive." "Oh, you bet your sweet ass I can drive. They just don't let me." Grandma had overheard and she was in high dudgeon. But that's all that was said about it, and my aunt finally took me to the store, so I forgot about it. Years later, when I'd just gotten my license, I asked my mom what was up with grandma not driving. She explained that during Prohibition grandma bootlegged alcohol for moonshiners. She was very successful at it. She was so successful at it that when the moonshiners were finally busted, even though the revenue has never caught my grandma, her license was suspended by the state to never be reissued. Later in life she was told she could petition for it back, but it came with an admission of guilt or some such. She told him to go to hell. I love this story so much. Your grandma was an old-timey badass. I knew an old man who, when he was a little kid, watched the bootleggers speed through their town as it was supposedly quite the exciting event for their small farming community. Little kids were probably watching your grandma race down the roads of their towns back in the day, too. She had a way about her. That's for damn sure. Cats hanging around your place and you can't get rid of them? Just rub their ass raw with a piece of corncob and splash turpentine on it. That'll get him gone. Note: do not actually do this. Cruelty to animals laws have come a long way since the 1930s. Can't get rid of ducks who are eating in your garden? You get a piece of salt pork a few inches long, and you real tight tie some fishing line to it. Dangle it out there to the ducks, but give yourself 5 feet of line per duck. That first one will eat it, and it'll go through their system in minutes. By the time the hour is up, you'll have 6 ducks on a string and you can lead those bastards to someone else's garden. But my favorite memory was her sitting on a rocker on the front porch, wrapped in a shawl, chewing tobacco, and spitting off the edge to the flower bed. My uncle comes pulling up, gets out of the car, and he's white as a ghost. Everyone asks what's wrong, and he starts explaining that just as he topped the hill coming out of town there were 2 semi-trucks coming right at him in both lanes. He did the only thing he could do, and he skirted the ditch on the shoulder but managed to keep the car from going down into the bar ditch. Barely survived. Grandma huffs and says, "That's the difference between you and me. Ida hit that son of a bitch head on." Spit. I would read a whole blog with nothing but stories of your grandmother. She was one of a kind. She wrapped paper plates in saran wrap to reuse them. I'm not sure on the trade-off there. She'd once heard the phrase, "He's so tight he kept a rock in his pocket to save on shoe leather." Now, don't worry if that confuses you. You see, people used to strike matches against the bottom of their leather shoe soles, because matches didn't have a striking pad on the side. But she liked this so much, she kept a rock with her just in case. When she made her famous banana nut bread, she had these tiny loaf pans, and she'd make each of the kids their very own loaf. She could peel an apple with a paring knife in under 10 seconds with the peel in one long piece. She'd then scrape a spoon across the surface of the apple to make applesauce, to hand feed me even when I was old enough to feed myself. She wouldn't go to the storm cellar until it was an honest-to-God tornado warning, and if it was reported as anything under an F3, she wouldn't even do that. She was fearless, and she expected the same from every adult, but she was usually disappointed. She swatted wasps with her open palm, and anyone who'd been afraid of the wasp, she'd pick it up and flick it at him. More, please. She didn't have a lot of rules, but she enforced them with vigor. No singing at the dinner table. First warning, she'd pop her teeth out and sit him on her napkin. The threat was, keep singing and you can get your own pair of these. Shirts must be worn at the dinner table. This gravy is hot and it'd be a damn shame if you suffered terrible burns when she dumped it on your half-naked idiot self. And whatever you do, never pick your nose. She'd roll up a newspaper and thwack you with it the first time, but the second time she'd just backhand you. Pretty much driving your own finger up your nose. I never had that happen to me, but I didn't think my cousin would ever stop bleeding. All of her most violent punishments were reserved for adults. She figured adulthood started at around 15. Kids would get spankings. She'd have you go pick your own switch, and then she'd beat your ass with it. But whatever you did, you didn't want to refuse. She'd skip the switch and haul out the razor strop. This long, thick piece of leather used to sharpen straight razors. Trust me, you wanted the switch. The strop was brutal. Thank you for watching all the way until the end, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment any weird or funny family traditions. Click the video above if you want to continue to watch my content. Until next time.